candidates for the Congressional District 9, always get that confused, which now encompasses all of San Joaquin County. We have Tom Patti, a San Joaquin County supervisor who's running, and Josh Harder, U.S. Rep. Is your District 9 or 10? I always get that number.
Today is number 10.
Okay. We're very fortunate to have them both here, so now we can have an opportunity to get to meet them, to compare, contrast their views, and to hear from them directly. This joint Ed Board meeting, or forum, or whatever we're calling it, was the idea of my colleague here, Garth Stapley. He is the opinions editor for the Modesto Bee. So we're just gonna sit down, hopefully have a good conversation, which will be enlightening for us all. We have about 37 minutes, correct? Okay, so we're just gonna get into it.
Are we short on time? I apologize for being
That's
late.
okay.
I really do, guys. I'm so sorry. We don't have the full hour?
No, we do not. Josh Harder has a hard stop at 2. They have other commitments as well. That's okay. Well, it may be harder for you two, but there's no warm up, so we'll just jump into everything. All right? Let's start with inflation. Let's see, last figures I saw mentioned that inflation this month is about 8.2%, which is down from the previous month, but all you gotta do is go to the gas pump to see gas at $6 a gallon. Let's start with your views on what can be done to help consumers who feel this problem. And we didn't flip a coin, but because I'm looking straight down the middle, let's start with Mr. Hart.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for having us. Thank you for doing this, John and Garth. Inflation is one of the biggest challenges we're dealing with across the Central Valley. I'm raising my family here. I'm seeing it when I'm buying baby food and paying for gas. People are driving 4 or 5 hours a day across the Central Valley and paying $5 or $6 a gallon for gas. And we have to tackle every single cost that we're dealing with. I think we have to suspend the gas tax immediately. I think we should have done it a year ago. That would take $1 per gallon off of the price that people are paying today, both the state and the federal gas tax combined. We need to attack healthcare costs. People are paying a price for insulin across the valley 10 times what people are paying in other countries. That's unaffordable. And we need to make sure that we are focusing on lowering the costs that folks are dealing. The same is true with housing costs. We have a community that has grown quite dramatically across San Joaquin County. Folks want to live here. That's tremendous. But our services have not kept up. Our housing stock has not kept up. Our education system has not kept up. Our infrastructure has not kept up. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we are making targeted investments, building the homes that we need to accommodate the folks that live here today.
Tom, Mr. Patti?
Great, sure, thank you. And I would like to thank the Stockton Record and Modesto Bee for arranging us, and of course, the Congressman from Stanislaus for being here today for this discussion. What we really have to start to look at is root cause. Where does inflation come from? Well, supply and demand is a big factor, and oftentimes, and as Josh Harder has just talked about, there's a shortage of that supply, whether it be housing and oftentimes the fuel and energy, and that war on energy that we're facing. What's the cause of the escalation in costs? Look what's happened in the last 2 years. We've overregulated, we've suspended production, and we've put a moratorium on the production right here in America. We've canceled a pipeline, we've exasperated and closed off, we've exasperated the opportunity and closed off federal land for oil production and exploration. So if you want to start lowering your food costs, you have to start rolling back and walking back the actions that have been taken on that war of energy. Energy is economic stability and American security, as well as food security. When you start raising the cost of fertilizer, when you start raising the cost of everything it takes for our supply chain to be delivered, you start making it more difficult for people. And we're talking about $5,000 to $8,000 per household. In San Joaquin County, that's at least 1 month's rent or 1 month's salary flushed down the drain. And that's damaging for our citizens right here in our county.
And also because we got started late, I was a little bit off with what I was doing. I want to let you both know you'll both have about 90 seconds to reply to a question. And we have Maria Figueroa over in the corner.
30-second warning.
We'll prompt you with
Sure.
various warnings.
I caught
Yeah,
it.
let's move to a campaign question. I'll take you one at a time. Mr. Patti, are you a MAGA extremist and a Marjorie Taylor Greene sidekick?
Absolutely not. Anybody that even comes up with any type of allegation like that, first off, doesn't know me. On the Board of Supervisors, I work across party lines. I'm proud to have Democrats, such as Stockton Councilwoman Christina Fugazi, such as California Assemblyman Carlos Villalpudua, work hand in hand with me on solutions, and there isn't any separation with us. Unfortunately, my opponent has seemed to be taking and running wild with the idea and trying to identify me without even knowing me, never even had a conversation with me to identify who I actually am, what my positions are. He recently has a campaign out that I'm looking for a national ban on abortion, which may be a question that we'll get to. These are fallacies and fabrications and narratives that are unfortunate. It's actually below where an office holder and what they should be doing instead of trying to smear somebody. Why don't we try to identify the differences in our practices and our policies? But in no way, shape, or form would I ever be considered a MAGA. And I will tell you factually, I don't care if your name is Trump, or Biden, or Pelosi, or Harder. They've all done things that disappoint us.
Just a quick follow-up. It is a Democrat-leaning district. You've got to capture some Democratic votes if you hope to win. Are you seeking crossover votes?
Well, of course, I'm not seeking anything other than common sense voters. I'm not running for a party to oppose another party. The San Joaquin County and the voters here are more conservative than perhaps what Mr. Hart is used to over in the Bay Area when he lived there, or who he might be coalescing with in Washington, D.C. I work right here in San Joaquin County, not for a political party, but for the community. And if the interests and the actions I've taken here in San Joaquin County have a crossover of support, fantastic. There's not one single thing you'd say is, well, that was real conservative. My decisions are for my community.
Mr. Harder, are you a Pelosi-Biden liberal?
I'm not. And look, let's, don't take my word for it. Last week in the San Francisco Chronicle, my opponent called himself the Antichrist of the left. That's not my words. Those are his. I don't see how somebody who is demonizing half of our community is going to find a way to actually reach out and actually get things done either here or in DC. The reality is, I'm focused on being an independent voice for the Valley. 95% of the bills I've written or co-sponsored have been with somebody of the other party. That is higher than any other member of Congress in the country. That's how we've been able to make progress on water, on veterans issues, attacking the challenges that we're dealing with, working with all sides. And we've seen the proof points of that already. In 2020, 50,000 people in our community voted for Donald Trump for president, and then also voted for me. More crossover voters than in any other community, bar maybe one or two across the country. That shows that our record of actually being able to reach out to folks regardless of party lines has actually borne fruit. And my commitment to this community is that I'm going to stand up to party leaders in Sacramento or Washington and do what's best for our area, whether that's pushing to suspend the gas tax, which has made me very unpopular in Sacramento, whether that's pushing against the Delta Tunnel, which is not good for our community and has had a lot of folks in DC and Sacramento mad. My job is to do what's best for us here.
Can I ask one quick follow-up? What prominent Republicans have endorsed you, Mr. Harder?
We've got a lot of Republican endorsements as well as folks. I can give you the whole list. But look,
No, I just want a few prominents.
Yeah, look, I think organizations like PORAC, which is the largest law enforcement organization in the country, traditionally sponsors and supports mostly Republican candidates, has supported our campaign because I record supporting law enforcement across the Valley. But I don't spend a whole lot of time in closed doors behind with folks that are key influencers or prominent on Twitter. My job is to reach out to voters. And if you look at the actual track record we've built, you look at the folks that have supported us across party lines, we've had more crossover voters in this district, in these lines in the Valley, than in any other in the country.
Prominent Democrats supporting you, Mr. Patti.
As I mentioned, I work very closely with.
I understand who you've worked closely with. Who has endorsed you that is a prominent Democrat?
I've got locally, I've got City Council member Christina Fugazi has openly endorsed me. I've got County Supervisor Miguel Villalpudua has publicly endorsed me. And those would be kind of the local office holders. I haven't, because of oftentimes party politics, I haven't asked my friend Carlos for endorsement. he has a state job to handle, and I would never interfere with that.
Thank you.
I'm gonna follow up on one thing that I think I heard. Antichrist of the left?
Leftist.
Will you just explain that, please?
Well, yeah, you've got some people, I would believe, that this leftist agenda that might be on the extreme of a political party that have targeted me for the last 2+ years. We've political operatives that have come into San Joaquin County that have openly lied and slandered and spread misinformation, much like apparently might be politically aligned with Mr. Harder, that will outright lie to try to get political gain at my name and reputation, which I find quite offensive, to tell you the truth, Mr. Blount. My name and reputation in San Joaquin County is mostly as a business leader. I've got decades, not one lawsuit in business, not one business owner. And I've got hundreds of businesses over the last 20 years, and before that, hundreds of businesses with my father for 30 years. To be accused of things like so baseless as bribery and corruption, or slush funds, fabricated, zero fact in any capacity, but yet he's going to run with it, put billboards up, and try to make a name for himself at my expense. And I find that objectionable. I find it very objectionable. And I think it's below a sitting congressional representative that wants to represent an area when all you can do is tell lies about your opposition when nobody knows you. So the only way they're going to get to know you is to deflect attention away from your abysmal record, which, by the way, 100% of the votes that for Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden have come from my opposition right here. 100%, there's no separation. He votes with Nancy and Joe 100% of the time. Right down the party lines, and that's unfortunate. That doesn't serve the community.
Should we give him a moment to rebut if he wants to do that?
I do.
Look, my opponent calls it a smear campaign. I think voters deserve to know how you voted. If you supported an increase in the gas tax, adding costs to families in the valley, if you raised the cost of prescription drugs at San Joaquin General County Hospital, if that's a smear campaign, if you're embarrassed by those votes, maybe you shouldn't have voted that way. And you want to talk about your conduct in office, you want to talk about the fact that you started this campaign when you were on parole for a DUI arrest, the fact that you're the first San Joaquin County supervisor, at least in my memory, to have been censured for abusive behavior because of your colleagues, and the fact, of course, you've been under investigation for bribery over the last 2 years. That's not me making it up. That's what you admitted to the Stockton Record. And if you say you're innocent of these charges, I think what you should do is support making that investigation public. The fact that you do not support making that investigation public, I think tells everybody across our community what it's found.
Actually, if I could reply, that investigation is public, and guess where the accusation of bribery came from? The representative from Stanislaus' office, his paid staff member, made an allegation to a supervisor. It was investigated, and when investigated, she said, I don't really know very much about that. And the report's been released to the San Francisco Chronicle. So my opponent, purposely, his staff, came forward with an allegation of bribery, which would never happen. How can I bribe anybody when I don't even have a homeless plan, or whatever the silly details are? And I've got the alleged person I tried to bribe wrote out a letter that no such conversation ever happened. But again, when interviewed, his staff's like, yeah, I don't know very much about that. Well, let's back up about 8 months earlier before we spent tens of thousands of dollars investigating. So you want to talk about and try to go through all the different myriads of anything? I have had a concerted effort in San Joaquin County by 2 supervisors in particular to slander me and minimize me politically, because for whatever reasons, and that's partisan politics or personal politics, whatever it is. I'm proud of my record, but let me state clearly, I didn't get elected to make friends. If I ruffle a few feathers, absolutely. I expect results, but I've never threatened anybody. Some of those allegations in that report, I'll sit down and go piece by piece, one by one. Not one instance is there a valid claim of threatening anybody. I'm one supervisor. I don't have authority to take away funding or impose anything on somebody. We are a board of supervisors, and we work by majority decision.
Can I say one more thing about this? Look, don't take my word for it. This report is not public. And it's hard to go line by line through this report when the voters can't actually read it for themselves. You have a vote in this. If you support making this investigation public, then people should make their own minds about what's true in that report. You want to talk about smear campaigns? You're out there campaigning saying that I'm Gavin Newsom's cousin, saying that I'm Nancy Pelosi's nephew. These are conspiracy theories. These are blatant lies. What's next? That I'm the reincarnation of Elvis? I mean, is this really the foundation of your campaign? The fact that you're lying about things like that, I think tells voters that you're willing to lie about just about anything to get elected.
So I have to ask, for the record, may I say something?
We're
Because
gonna need to move on to policy things,
Yeah.
but that was pretty personal, so we're gonna give
Yeah.
you just a few seconds.
So if we want to talk about veracities and truth, okay, my opponent lives in a multi-million-dollar house in Washington, D.C. He claims he moved to Tracy. Well, I don't know why he moved to Tracy, why he abandoned where he grew up and graduated high school and lived in Turlock, and I believe he cares about Turlock and Stanislaus quite dearly. But he lives in Washington, D.C., and here's what's very interesting. His wife works for the state of Virginia, and her job, economic development. She has successfully recruited businesses out of the state of California, and here's a representative for the state of California, and his wife is taking jobs and economic development and opportunity out of the state of California to Virginia. So we want to talk about integrity. This liar, that's an absolute blatant liar in every single representation he has, whether it be a mailer, a billboard, or radio ads. Whether it be talked about a slush fund or the bribery thing, and it's his office. He may want to try and dodge the bullet, but it's his office and his chief of staff that made the allegation of bribery and is unsubstantiated. So here we have an office of misrepresentation.
Can you name any of the businesses that his wife reportedly recruited out of California?
I believe the biggest one was Nestle. They took a headquarters out of Los Angeles. She successfully drafted Nestle out of California, and they relocated to Virginia, where again, they live full-time in Washington, D.C. He signed a document, by the way, that his primary residence for his loan to buy the multi-million-dollar location, his primary residence, in order to qualify for that loan, would be Washington, D.C.
We're gonna need to move away from the personal
I may need
attacks
to.
that both guys have indulged in, but if somebody mentioned my wife, I would want some time too. So we're gonna give a bit of time to Mr. Harder.
I think it's desperate and pathetic to not want to campaign on the issues, but instead to attack my family. My wife didn't move Nestle out of Los Angeles. That happened a decade ago. Many jobs before the job that she's had now. I'm proud of my wife. I'm proud that she has a career. I'm proud that she's the best mom to our 7-month-old daughter imaginable. And I'm proud to be living in Tracy. If I don't live in Tracy, I don't know why I spend so much time doing the dishes and taking out the trash there. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And yes, I have an apartment in Washington as well. Turns out this is actually a travel job. You may actually need to read the Constitution. But the reality is, let's focus on these issues. My opponent dodged the conspiracy theories and the lies he said about this campaign again and again. Let's focus on the issues. He wants to dodge the votes he's actually
Let's talk about some issues then. The Delta Water Tunnel, Mr. Harder, we'll start with you.
Look, water is the lifeblood of the valley. It's why my family settled here 172 years ago in Manteca. And it's why we're all still here. It'd be a dust bowl if we don't have the water resources that we have now 50 years from now. The last thing that we need to do in the midst of a drought is take water from Northern California and ship it down south. I have been a staunch opponent of the Delta Tunnel since the day it was proposed. Well, maybe not, because that was a long time ago, but say over 60 years ago since I was born. But we are doing everything we can to stop it. It's made me deeply unpopular in Sacramento, but my bill, if passed, would kill this zombie project once and for all, and it would redirect those funds towards projects that actually generate new water for our community. The storage projects, the water recycling, the desalination plants that we're going to need to make sure that we're getting out of the drought. We've made accomplishments on this. I worked with Republicans and Democrats alike to get the first federal funding for a new water project in the valley in 50 years. That's what we need to see if we're going to be able to make sure that we're prepared, not just for what we're seeing today, but what we're seeing the next 10 years.
Mr. Patti, Delta Water Tunnel.
So, of course, we adamantly oppose anything in that capacity, and I'm glad that the congressman from Stanislaus is joining the fight that we've already had. The Board of Supervisors and an entire coalition of opposition has absolutely assembled, and they've successfully stopped the 2 tunnels, and they're equally assembled to stop the single tunnel. Any help or defunding that could happen along the way, fantastic. It's a joint effort for the region. What I'm very proud of as a county supervisor is the action I take. Last year, I was on the Urban County Coalition, 14 largest counties for the state of California. I'm the first supervisor in the history of California that successfully put together a water policy for all of the state of California. The 14 largest, 80% of California's population. It's simple. Water, water, water. I don't care if you're doing recycling, recapture, storage, above ground, below ground, but here's what we also agreed to and we put into there. Unless we put in a moratorium, unless we suspend CEQA, you're not going to get a water project off the ground. It took 19 and a half years to do desalination in Carlsbad. You just saw a 17-year project in Huntington get suspended after $100 million. The Coastal Commission said no. So these things will never get forward until, and I would hope that my opponent would stand up and say, I'm going to push back against the environmentalists that are absolutely stopping and preventing water storage in any capacity in the state of California. So if we suspend CEQA, which by the way, for clean energy or sports arenas, CEQA is suspended. They can build a sports arena within a short period of time. Let's add water storage to that same bill that's renewed in Sacramento.
I really appreciate the discussion on water policy, but the question was the Delta Water Tunnel. Are you opposed or do you?
I'm sorry if you missed
support
that. Of course
Yeah,
I'm opposed. I stood opposed. I'm glad
Very
he's
good.
joining
Thank
us
you.
in standing opposition of that. So moving on, what do we need regionally? And we need regional self-sufficiency statewide, so that it's not our water being shipped south and that's their only dependency was what is shipped. So of course we stand against the tunnel.
Okay.
And I stand in favor of, as I'm sure everybody would, but perhaps my opponent would stand up and challenge the environmental activism that prevents water storage.
Very good. What is your position on the idea of a national abortion ban?
So, I do not believe that we should have a national abortion ban. And here's another example, unfortunately, my opponent making a broad manufactured assumption, and he's got billboards, he's got radio, he's got mailers out there with an absolute 100%, which seems to be a pattern, blatant lie. I'm not in favor of a national ban. What has happened, as we all know, the Supreme Court kicked it back to the states. And the states are deciding. It's even on the ballot here in the state of California.
Very good. Same question, Mr. Harder.
I support Roe versus Wade. I think it's terrifying that my 7-month-old daughter is going to grow up with fewer rights than her mother, than her grandmother. I think what we're seeing in Ohio and Texas with 14-year-old girls being arrested, with nurses and doctors being criminalized, that can happen here. And my opponent wants to say that he opposes that. Well, he's endorsed by extreme anti-abortion groups like Californians for Life. And their stated platform is a nationwide ban on abortion. So if he's found his conscience on this issue, if he supports reproductive rights, then he should return the money of anti-abortion groups like Californians for Life and the other politicians who have proposed this legislation and we're going to do it if they get his vote.
Unfortunately, another blatant lie. I've never received money from that organization. This is a blatant,
Have you
blatant lie.
Have you accepted money from any anti-abortion group?
Of course not. Not at all. Not in any way, shape, or
Or
form.
politicians,
I never even
anti-abortion
answer-
politicians.
I never even answer the questionnaires when they send them to me. I'm a non-participant in the anti-abortion narrative.
Okay.
It's legal in the state of California, and it'll be remaining legal in the state of California. And I'm not here to get in the way of the very difficult decisions that a woman, and a doctor may have to make.
Okay. Let's start. This is for Mr. Harder to start.
But it's unfortunate the lying that continues from
Okay.
this representative from Stanislaus.
Let's move on. What's the answer? Stockton and San Joaquin County has a large crime problem. From the federal view in this position, what can be done to address that?
We need more cops on the street, and we need to address the root causes of the criminal behavior that we're seeing, especially the drugs that exist. I've done ride-alongs across all of our community. They ride-along with the Stockton Police Department the other day, and they told me, if you have your cat stuck in a tree in Palo Alto, they send out 3 cop cars and a fire truck. If you have your cat stuck in a tree in Stockton, they tell you to go buy a new cat. And part of that is just the reality of emerging from bankruptcy, the stress on our city budgets that all cities across the Central Valley have been facing, but we need to do more. And that's why I have worked to make sure that we are expanding, doubling the size of the high-intensity drug trafficking area, which is the federal task force that worked hand in hand with our local police departments to get the fentanyl and the meth off the streets, as well as a new bill that passed the House just a few weeks ago that would create a new program so Stockton and Lodi and Tracy don't have to compete with New York City for federal dollars that will help make sure that there's the training, the equipment, and the cops that we actually need. And that's why I've been supported by law enforcement officials across our district, as well as the largest police organization in California, PORAC, because they know I have their back.
Mr. Day?
So for the record, PORAC supports incumbents. I have the local police officers association in Stockton and a variety of others in San Joaquin County and all the different cities. I've got the deputy sheriff's association. Those are the largest ones. That's the rank and file. That's the boots on the ground that endorse me. Now, what do we do about crime? Well, first off, he just asked me to return money from money I never received, but apparently he's received money from Ocasio-Cortez's Defund the Police PAC. So I would ask him to publicly denounce the Defund the Police movement from Ocasio-Cortez and return that $5,000. So that's in my opposition research about him. So let's get down to the root cause. What's going on with crime? Lack of education and lack of opportunity. We can enforce, and we should enforce, and we need boots on the ground. We need adequate funding for our police officers. They got a new contract in Stockton, the deputy sheriffs, proudly mid-contract. As chairman last year, I opened up the contract. Instead of being 25% below the median and us losing officers to nearby cities, I brought the pay salary to the exact median level, 25% increase. And now our officers, instead of leaving, our deputies are staying. I'm proud to have accomplished that because that's a call to action. That's pay equity, and I support that whether it be gender or for job performance. So the biggest impact we could have, vocational education. I'm proud of Delta College. I partnered with the president. We have a 1,000 job apprentice program at Delta College for students that are there and people to come into Delta College and get paid by that fund to actually be employed and get real job experience. Let's create opportunity zones. Let's create enterprise zones. Let's bring those jobs to the areas that need them instead of generations being left behind.
A follow-up. Have you accepted, has your campaign accepted money from the Defund the Police organization?
No, I think it's outrageous to suggest that I support defunding the police, and it's also insulting to the police officers in our community that have supported our campaign and the police organizations that have endorsed us. I've been a strong supporter of making sure that we're passing bills to help local police departments. In fact, later this week, I'm going to be with the Tracy Police Department presenting them a check for new equipment that we were able to get written directly into the federal government to help keep both our residents and our cops safe. That's the record that we've actually had, and don't take my word for it. Listen to the folks that have actually supported our campaign because of it.
Yeah, in some way, capacity, shape, or form, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez had posted the representative from Stanislaus's name as an at-risk candidate, and she gave him $5,000. So I'm glad that he's seen the light, as he said earlier, and I'm glad that he might actually be returning those dollars and denouncing her mandate requirement to receive those dollars. You have to sign a pledge to defund the police and reduce the size of our military spending. So I'm glad he now is refuting that.
Anything to say about that, or are we moving on?
If you want to run against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, feel free to move to New York City and do so.
Mr. Patti, was the 2020 presidential election stolen from Mr. Trump?
I don't believe so at all. I think this election, and of course we're all in favor of integrity and honest elections, but I'm not here looking backward and saying who did or didn't win. Right now, Joe Biden is the president of America, and I support the success of America, whomever the president would be. So I'm not here to question the integrity of elections. As a county supervisor, I believe we have elections that are fair and honest right here in San Joaquin County, and that's what I care about. Outside of that, the county, I know there's some conservative groups that have looked into and done audits and reviewed, and they've come back and said, actually, there's nothing there. So I'm not focused on the 2020 election. I'm focused on, of course, 2022 and moving this country forward. You have to ask yourself, in the last 2 years, how are things trending in America? That's what I care about. That's what this election's about, not 2020.
Okay, but let's stay on point. Mr. Harder, same question.
Sounds like a dodge to me. Look, I was at the Capitol on January 6th. It broke my heart to see the blood of Capitol Police officers, to see our nation's institutions trampled. And what was even more terrifying than the violence that day was the votes afterwards, when Kevin McCarthy led over 100 members of the Republican caucus to try to overturn the results of that election. And if you don't think that they've doubled down on all those same things that contributed to January 6th over the last year and a half, then you haven't been paying attention. And so, it's not enough for my opponent to spoke opposition. He needs to oppose the leaders that have done that. Kevin McCarthy has given tens of thousands of dollars to his campaign, has had many others that voted to overturn the results of the 2020 election. And until he returns that money, until he says he won't vote for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, I'm not sure why we should trust any of his rhetoric on this.
Any rebuttal, Mr. Patti?
Well, first off, are we pleased with Nancy Pelosi's agenda and how she's leading this Congress and the person that votes with her 100% of the time? So I'm not in Congress and I don't know the actions that were taken that are trying to undermine the election and the integrity. I catch it on the news, and whatever happened on January 6th, those that vandalized, those that stormed the Capitol should be held accountable. Just like anybody from any other organization that burns down a gas station or does looting needs to be held accountable. I have no problem with justice. Our society should not be about civil discourse. Our society should be about freedom of speech and freedom to assemble, but not freedom to destroy. And that includes the state capitol. So I don't know what dodge you're saying I just dodged. Joe Biden's the president, and I have no contention with that. That's the president of America, and I'm wishing for our success as a country.
The January 6th committee just reconvened today. They voted unanimously to subpoena Mr. Trump. Should Mr. Trump be held accountable for January 6th?
Anybody that has anything to do with the conspiracy and or the actions taken on January 6th should be held accountable. I don't care what your name is. That's a fact. I have no problem with it. I'm focused on, right now, this community that I grew up in and the challenges and concerns that we have. January 6th will be sorted out. I'm glad they're having hearings. They're open, they're transparent. Whatever comes from that is exactly what should happen. Let's open up, shed light, and air it out, and whoever's accountable needs to be held responsible, and whatever the penalty may be.
Same question about January 6th, Mr. Harder.
Of course, folks should be held accountable, but that includes Kevin McCarthy and the 100 other Republicans that led the charge to overturn the results of the 2020 election. And if you don't believe that making Kevin McCarthy Speaker of the House is going to lead to more crises down the road, then again, you have been watching very closely. And McCarthy and other politicians who led that have been supporting with tens of thousands of dollars my opponent. And so, again, his rhetoric here just doesn't pass the smell test. You can't accept their money and then say that they also need to be held accountable at the same time.
Mr. Patti was asked whether Mr. Trump should be held accountable. What is your answer to that?
Absolutely. Mr. Trump should be held accountable. I voted to impeach the president. It wasn't a decision that I took lightly, but it was a decision because I swore an oath to the office. And again, my goal is to make sure that we are focused on the bread and butter issues that people care about right here, which is the cost of gas, which is making sure that we're lowering the cost of health care, getting the housing that we desperately need, supporting and protecting our water. But we can only do that if we have a democratic system that actually trusts our election processes. And unfortunately, my opponent is supported by many of the folks that have contributed to undermining the legitimacy of our constitutional process.
Well, as interesting as this is, we have a hard stop at 2 o'clock. So now we're gonna move into 2-minute closing statements. Since Mr. Harder went first, I'll give you the option, Mr. Patti. Do you prefer to go your closing first or last?
Well, if he went first, I'm supposed to go? I mean, I'm not gonna deflect or defer.
Please go ahead.
Sure. So this election is a really fantastic opportunity. As a local businessman, as a person that's raised my daughter here, as a person that has done work in the community for local nonprofits, in the past 20 years as a business owner, I've done economic activity, commerce, I've employed people to the sum of millions of dollars. My opponent, $0.00. While he pretends to care about Tracy, I don't know why he would abandon his Stanislaus home and where he graduated high school in Modesto. Instead, somehow, I believe when Nancy Pelosi told him to move over here, he changed his mind where he first announced that he's going to run in CD 13. He now announced he's going to run CD 9, which is fine. We have that right in America. What's most important to me is continuing my service to the community, not as a business owner, but now as a public servant. I'm not going into Washington to support a party. I'm going to Washington to support my community. It's the community I grew up in. It's the community my father and mother worked for decades and did business and employment. It's a community where my roots are. This is a community that I know innately. I grew up out in Union Island farming with the Del Porto family. I grew up working as a little boy on local signs and making neon and fixing and installing signs in this entire region as we built business to a place we called home, a place where we have roots. My opponent is trying to come over here in spite of his roots in Stanislaus. What I love the most about this election is redistricting has established and given us a new opportunity for representation that's local. No more 30% from the Bay Area. We now have San Joaquin County opportunity for San Joaquin representatives. As a county supervisor, I'm exceptionally proud of my record of getting things done on behalf of the people, not on behalf of an ideology or a party. I don't vote party line in anything I do. I vote in every single direction what's going to best serve this community. I'm troubled by the direction that we're going as a nation and as this community. I'm troubled by the open border, the escalation in inflation, the exorbitant gas prices. These are all actions that have taken in just the last 2 years. Look at the trend, inflation. Look at the trend. Look at where our 401ks are going, down in the wrong direction. Now's the time for us to pivot and balance out the system. The one-party rule isn't working.
Thank you. Mr. Harder?
Look, I'm running because I love this community. 5th generation resident of the Valley from the time my great-great-grandfather settled in Manteca to now, when I'm raising my 7-month-old daughter as a 6th generation resident of our community. And we've made a lot of progress on issues, some despite the challenges that are created by my opponent. He talks about inflation. He supported a 40% increase in the gas tax. I want to suspend it. He supported he voted to raise prescription drug prices at San Joaquin General Hospital. I voted to cap the price of insulin, which is critical in an area where half of our community is diabetic or pre-diabetic. Those are the differences. My values are to be independent, to do the right thing regardless of party, to be local. You won't see me screaming at folks on cable news, and to be effective, to actually get things done. And if you look at our record, we've done that again and again. I'll just close by giving one example, which is very personal to me, which is the work we've done on veterans benefits. My grandfather served 2 tours in Vietnam. He had his life cut short by Agent Orange when I was 3 years old. I barely had a chance to know my grandfather growing up because of that. And for the entire history of our country, those Vietnam vets, like my grandfather, with Agent Orange affected diseases, were not being helped by our government. They were completely abandoned when they came back home. I thought that was inexcusable. I worked to get bills that have been on the back burner for decades passed into law. And I wrote a bill that was supported by 100% of Republicans and Democrats in Congress. Mitch McConnell voted for my bill. President Trump signed it into law just a few days before he left office. And now 50,000 Vietnam vets across our country have medical benefits because of that legislation, including folks across San Joaquin County like Joshua Melendez dealing with bladder cancer in Tracy. That's the type of leadership that I've had over the last 4 years, and that's the record that we're going to hopefully be building on in the future. Thank you.
Well, I'll say it again. This was very interesting. I wish we had more time. But I'd like to thank both of you for coming. I appreciate the conversation. I'd like to thank all of you for coming as well. I appreciate you being here to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right.